The Lives of the Saints by the Reverend Alban Butler, taken from the 4th edition, published in 1954. August 9th. St. John Vianney, the Cure d'Ars. Among the almost innumerable good works that sprang, phoenix-like, from the apparent ruin of religion in France, caused by the Great Revolution, must be numbered, side by side with the pious congregations and institutes, that of the great saint of the parochial clergy of these later times. For Jean-Baptiste Marie Vianney is not only for all time the holy and ever-lovable Cure d'Ars, but he is a sort of perpetual institution in himself, animating each succeeding generation of clergy and laity with the example of his heroic sanctity, sound common sense, and touches of humor, these latter very often, like the sayings of Sir Thomas More, flashes of holy wisdom disguised as quiet jests. The circumstances of the early years of the great apostle of parochial life are tolerably well known. His birth at Dardilly, a village near Lyon, his God-fearing, hard-working peasant parents, Mathieu and Marie Vianney, were kind to the poor, and among these, on one occasion, St. Benedict Joseph Labre, the childish labors of the little John Baptist in the fields, and his wonderful love of God and of holy things. All these incidents worthily introduced to the reader a life that was to be one of the spiritual wonders of the 19th century. John Baptist's earliest recollections were those of the terror when religion was proscribed, the Mass outlawed, and the priests hunted as they were in England in the reign of Elizabeth. No doubt in after years the memories of the great sacrifice, said by stealth in barns, and the instructions of priests by midnight, made the Cure of Ars compare what was a passing phase of trial with that ostracism of religion, which is more or less continuous in the world, an unhappy condition of things which he was to do so much to counteract by his heroic virtues and example. When John Baptist was 20 years of age, he became a pupil of the Abbé Bally's school for aspirants to the priesthood at Écully. Already he was a model of holiness, but he seems to have been one of those many students who suffer from a form of neurasthenia, which causes sudden and unexpected lapses of memory, and makes the ready display of book learning a real difficulty. Latin was his chief obstacle, and to obtain help to acquire a sufficient knowledge of the language for his ecclesiastical studies, his pilgrimage to the tomb of St. John Francis Regis was undertaken, and the result is said to have been a great improvement of memory, which made study henceforth much easier. In fact, for over a year, John Baptist was able to act as schoolmaster at Noé when evading the conscription order of Napoleon. The emperor's despotic rule and his insatiable ambition, which sent scores of thousands of young Frenchmen to death on the battlefield every year, were loathed in most parts of rural France, and in secreting himself at Noé, John Baptist found himself in the midst of a large refugee conscript population, prescribed over by an anti-imperialist mayor. He taught the children of the place for about a year, and with such success that the good people wished him to stay. In 1810, John Baptist gave his brother Francis his portion of the family inheritance, 3,000 francs, and the latter took his brother's place in the army, so that the former was able to return to his ecclesiastical studies at Verrières. In 1813, after further coaching under his friend the Abbé Bally, he entered the Grand Seminar of St. Tranans. His old memory trouble was not over, and there were doubts about ordaining him, but knowing the extraordinary fervor of the apparently unpromising seminarist, Monseigneur Corbon, Vicar General of the Cardinal Frêche, Archbishop of Lyon, resolved to ordain him, and on 13th of August, 1815, the Church of France and of the world was enriched by the promotion to the priesthood of John Baptist Vianney. After a curacy of 2 years under his great friend and patron, the Abbé Bally, the Abbé Vianney was appointed to Ars as cure. Chiefly, it seems, because the diocesan authorities considered that so dull and unlearned a priest would be more at home among illiterate peasants than in a more fashionable parish. In a comparatively few years, Ars and its pastor were to be household words throughout the Catholic world, with scores of thousands of pilgrims making their way annually to the village for ghostly advice and comfort. The new cure's first work was to improve the church of the place. The fabric was redecorated, and subsequently much enlarged. Frequent communion and perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament were instituted, in addition to the confraternity of the Rosary and other devotions, notably that to St. Philomena, my dear little saint, as the holy cure always styled the maiden martyr of Rome. Greatly distressed by the number of destitute or badly provided for girls in the district, the zealous cure in 1825 opened the famous refuge known as La Providence under the direction of 2 pious women, Benoît Lardet and Catherine Lasson. The young persons cared for there were given simple but solid instruction in reading, writing, and arithmetic, religion, and domestic work. When old enough for service, the girls were placed out in suitable situations, while many found vocations as sisters in various religious orders and congregations. In all these good works, the Holy Founder was much assisted by the Vicomte de Ars and his sister, two members of the old pre-Revolution aristocracy of France, whose memories are still held in benediction. In the midst of these labors, the curé was leading a life of extraordinary mortification. He literally gave away nearly everything he possessed, slept very little, and then on a hard bed or even on the floor, and fasted so rigorously that a few cold-boiled potatoes sufficed him for a week. In addition to these self-inflicted trials, God allowed others of a peculiarly distressing kind to afflict his servant. He was calumniated even by some of his brother priests, who dared to ascribe his zeal and obvious sanctity to ambition and hypocrisy, and who even went so far as to denounce to the bishop the misguided zeal of this ignorant and foolish curé. "Gentlemen," replied his lordship, "I wish you a little of that folly about which you complain. It would do no harm to your understanding." To this period of suffering also belongs the alleged diabolical manifestations, the unearthly noises at night, the violent shaking of the house, and even the burning of his furniture which accompanied them. Despite all these internal and external persecutions, the curé worked on, and very soon the fruit appeared. Ars had long been a model parish, the people fervent and scandals removed. From about 1835, streams of pilgrims began to come to the place to make their confessions to the saintly curé, hear his wonderful discourses, simple yet penetrating, and obtain from him those words of spiritual advice which were hung upon as oracles of heaven. From 1835, a service of public conveyances had to be organized between Lyon and Ars to convey to and fro these crowds, which were latterly estimated at over 20,000 a year. These pilgrims comprised persons of every class, priests and religious, ministers of state, members of the nobility, officers in the army and navy, professional and business people. The greater part of the day and night was spent by the curé in the confessional, and it became a common practice for those who sought his administration to wait their turn for 10, 15, or even 20 hours in the church. He gave advice to great prelates like Monseigneur Dupanlot, Bishop of Orleans, and Dr. Olathorn, Bishop of Birmingham. To the latter he said, "I believe, and I am sure, that the Church in England will return again to its ancient splendor." The sermons and discourses of the Holy Curé, which have been preserved in such works as The Spirit of the Curé de Ars, etc., are full of those fervent appeals, forcible lessons, and homely illustrations, which, joined to the living example of the preacher, never failed to make a profound impression. Though not learned or brilliant, the saint was full of useful pastoral information and strong common sense, which he conveyed chiefly by means of apt similitudes drawn from everyday life and experience. He abhorred singularity in devotion and deportment, and never encouraged forms of piety or mortification that might in any way be unsuitable or give rise to comment. The attempts which he made on more than one occasion to leave his parish were dictated by a saintly conviction of his own unfitness for parochial work. But in each case he returned to his sorrowing parishioners, convinced, as he was in the last instance, that God wished him not to go to La Trappe and there weep over his poor sins, but to continue laboring for souls, as the curé of Ars. In personal appearance, the curé de Ars was short, with an inclined head and a mass of thick white hair, which flowed down on either side. His eyes were bright, and he bore generally as striking an external resemblance to Voltaire as his great contemporary, the artist Paul de la Roche, did to Napoleon. In the May of 1843, the curé was taken seriously ill, and it was believed that the end was at hand. He recovered, cured, as he said, by St. Philomena, and, notwithstanding his mortified life and immense labors, he appears to have enjoyed during life generally pretty good health. About the middle of July 1859, he began to fail, and on the 29th, after catechizing and hearing confessions, as usual, had to take to his bed. "I think it is my poor end," he said, and so it proved, for after a short illness of less than a week, he expired on the 4th of August, just as his friend and fellow laborer, the Abbé Tauconnière, was reciting the words, "Let the holy angels of God come forth to meet him, and conduct him to the city of the heavenly Jerusalem." His obsequies in the church of Ars 2 days later were a public demonstration of affection, veneration, and sorrow, in which thousands joined. Declared venerable by Pius IX on the 3rd of October 1874, the curé de Ars was beatified by Pius X on the 8th of January 1905, and canonized by Pius XI on the 31st of May, 20 years later. St. John Baptist Vianney is one of the great spiritual phenomena of the Church. Without the natural gifts which are usually expected in those who influence others, he drew not only vast numbers of persons to himself by his magnetic holiness, but the good he effected has continued to grow and increase since his death. The wonderful story of his life and labors is eagerly read by clergy and laity everywhere, and though dead, he yet speaks to millions by the ever-living force of example. That example indeed appears to be as potent now as it was in his own time, and no doubt it will continue to perpetuate, as it were, his glorious apostolate throughout long years and to the remotest posterity.